Reflecting on my life, I realize I've always been drawn to the stability of routine. While my path didn't unfold exactly as I'd imagined in my teens, it took on a shape of its own, one I grew accustomed to with a mix of familiarity and flexibility. Over the years, the responsibilities of daily life formed a rhythm that I welcomed, a steady blend of work, home, and family obligations. Together, my husband and I navigated the early years of parenthood, balancing family duties while nurturing our marriage. Yet recently, things felt quieter, as if we had slipped into well-worn patterns. Starting my role as an executive assistant felt like a fresh beginning, a way to bring added purpose to my life and contribute more to my family. The travel was thrilling, giving me access to new destinations, high-stakes meetings, and experiences I never thought I'd have. My boss, Dan, quickly became a significant part of this journey, sharing my enthusiasm for each success and milestone. Yet over time, that closeness shifted, and gradually the boundary between our professional and personal lives began to fade. As I began to wake, I felt his familiar presence close behind, and we shared an intimate moment together. Afterward, we lay entwined until the alarm signaled the start of a new day, drawing us back to reality. My lover got out of bed and went into his adjoining hotel room to prepare for the day. We always booked 2 connected rooms with an internal door to keep our relationship discreet. Discovery of our affair would have serious consequences. I was Dan's executive assistant, and we had worked together for just over 2 years, with most of that time spent as a couple. My role required close collaboration and frequent travel across the country for office visits, client meetings, and industry conferences, giving us plenty of time together without raising suspicion. Yes, I was married with a husband at home. Our marriage began rather unexpectedly. At 15, I was dating my first boyfriend, Alan, when one evening while my parents were out, things escalated, and soon after, I found out I was pregnant. By the time we told our parents, keeping the baby was our only option. My parents were furious and pushed for adoption, while Alan's parents encouraged us to raise the child, offering to help so we could finish school. Alan supported me through the pregnancy despite the harsh comments from classmates and teachers. He defended me, often getting into fights and even facing suspension. The birth was overwhelming, but Alan was by my side. 2 days after my 16th birthday, we welcomed our beautiful baby girl, Lauren. Holding her, we knew we couldn't give her up. Initially, my parents distanced themselves, so we moved in with Alan's parents and took on the challenges of young parenthood. True to their promise, his parents helped with Lauren's early care, allowing us to complete high school. After graduating, we both found jobs, had a simple wedding, and moved into a small home of our own. Our university plans had to be delayed when another unexpected arrival blessed us with a second daughter, Emma. In short, with years of hard work, parenting challenges, and family support, we managed to complete our university degrees part-time, taking turns working and studying while raising our 2 daughters. We were deeply in love. Alan adored his 2 daughters, and they shared a close bond. My relationship with them was more strained. We argued frequently, and at times I felt a sense of resentment toward them, perhaps subconsciously blaming them for the life I once envisioned at 15 but never had. After graduating from college, I landed a job as executive assistant to Dan Johnson, the business development manager at a medical equipment company. I was 29 and he was 38. Dan and I quickly formed a strong professional partnership. I was thriving in my role, sales were booming, management was pleased, and I had even received a substantial raise. For the first time, I felt like I was leading a stable, normal life. My job involved a good deal of travel, often overnight. Sometimes I traveled solo, but more frequently I was on the road with Dan, exploring new places across the country, meeting clients, negotiating deals, and interacting with top-level executives was exhilarating. I was gaining incredible experience and enjoying every moment. I was away from home about 3 weeks out of every 4, with trips lasting anywhere from a single night to a full week or more, including occasional weekends. While the job and travel were fantastic, it also meant I was away from Alan and our daughters quite a bit, with Alan taking on most of the parenting responsibilities. Spending so much time with Dan, I got to know him well. Despite the age difference, he had been married about as long as I had and had 3 young children. To keep Alan from worrying about my frequent travels with Dan, I told a small lie, saying I was usually traveling alone or with another woman. I also mentioned that while I worked well with Dan professionally, I found him difficult on a personal level. In reality, Dan was charismatic and captivating. I was both intrigued by him and deeply attracted. I loved our time together and looked forward to our evenings at cozy restaurants where we'd enjoy dinner, sip wine, and talk for hours. One night, about 6 months into my job, Dan and I celebrated landing a major sales order earlier that day. We ordered a special dinner and shared a bottle of fine French champagne. As we sat there, slightly tipsy and elated, he reached across the table, placing his hand on mine. Looking into my eyes, he said, "Amy, you know I'm falling hard for you." My heart raced and I was speechless. After a moment, he stood, extending his hand to me. I hesitated briefly, then took his hand and he led me up to his hotel room. Inside, we shared a passionate night together. In the morning, we woke and made tender love, a moment that felt like pure bliss. With our flight home not until late morning, we ordered breakfast, relaxed in bed, and shared another intimate moment before it was time to leave. On the flight home, I felt some guilt about my unfaithfulness. Rationalizing it, I thought about how I'd never had the chance to explore other relationships when I was younger, and I felt I deserved this experience. Besides, part of me blamed my husband for neglecting me, especially since our intimate life hadn't fully recovered from the difficult early years of our marriage. I suddenly realized I'd been so absorbed with Dan the night before that I forgot to call Emma and wish her a happy birthday. She had just turned 11 and was growing up so fast. Looking over at Dan beside me on the plane, he smiled and squeezed my hand. Despite knowing it was wrong, I knew I was deeply drawn to him. When I arrived home, guilt hit me hard. Alan was thrilled to see me after a week apart, but I pulled away from his hugs and kisses. Later that night, when he tried to be intimate, I put him off, saying I was too tired. In truth, I was exhausted and sore from the night with Dan. It was the first time I'd ever turned Alan down. 18 months have now passed, and my relationship with Dan is as intense as ever. Over time, I learned to manage my guilt by shutting off part of my emotions at home. I didn't realize then how much I was emotionally distancing myself from Alan and my daughters. My thoughts were always on Dan and when we could be together again. Lying became second nature, and eventually I felt less guilty. I had fallen deeply for Dan and occasionally considered leaving Alan to be with him. We even joked about it while lying together, though we knew it would be a major decision with painful consequences, especially for our children. As our company expanded, we traveled more often. Sometimes, when no work trips were scheduled, we'd arrange a fake overnight business trip to stay at a hotel in a nearby city. We also took occasional mini vacations for anniversaries and birthdays, disguised as conferences at far-off locations, often in lovely beach resorts where a real conference provided our alibi. At work, we were extremely cautious, keeping a professional front and never sneaking off to meet privately. We scheduled lunches at different times, arrived and left separately, and kept any one-on-one contact strictly hidden. We used private email accounts outside the work system to communicate and avoided meeting in our town. At office functions, we only interacted in large groups and never sat together or engaged in private conversations. I would call home at a pre-chosen time each day to avoid any surprises. I never shared hotel details, and Alan never asked. I frequently complained to him about my hard-headed boss, the constant travel, and demanding work. Alan often suggested finding a job with less travel and a kinder boss, but I'd tell him I was learning too much and earning too well to leave. At occasional work events where partners were invited, we were careful to keep our expressions and emotions well managed. I introduced my husband to my boss, and he introduced us to his wife. We kept our interactions short and polite, chatting briefly before moving on to talk with other colleagues, never glancing each other's way after that. We were meticulous about covering our tracks, and no one ever suspected anything. My husband, Alan, was glad to see me succeed at work, but he was also frustrated by my frequent absences, which left him handling most of the parenting on top of his own IT consulting job. I still loved Alan, but I couldn't ignore the sense that we were drifting apart. He always seemed occupied with the girls and his work, and I felt a pang of guilt realizing how rare our intimate moments had become and how little affection we now shared. I resolved to make an effort to reconnect with him.
We faced a challenging start, having our first child at 16, marrying at 18, and welcoming another child soon after. Through hard work and teamwork, we both managed to graduate from college, me with a degree in IT and Amy with one in commerce, all while raising our 2 daughters. Despite the struggles, we didn't mind because we loved each other deeply. When Amy landed her first professional job after graduation about 2 years ago, she was thrilled, and I was incredibly proud of her. Finally, we both had stable, well-paying careers, setting us up to enjoy a more balanced life together. Initially, I fully supported her career, but I began to feel frustrated by the long hours and travel her job demanded. She left home around 7 a.m. and usually didn't return until 6 or 7 p.m. most weeks. She was away 1 or 2 nights, sometimes longer, and often didn't get back until Saturday afternoon. When she was home during the week, she either worked after dinner or zoned out in front of the TV. Saturdays, she'd sleep in and then go shopping. Sundays, she'd spend the morning at the gym and then meet her friends for brunch. She was usually too exhausted for any evening plans with me. We didn't spend much quality time as a family. She always seemed too busy to take vacation time, so the girls and I often went on holidays without her. I noticed changes in her personality. The loving wife and mother I knew was becoming distant, often irritable, and more self-absorbed. Our intimate life had become lackluster, and I found myself feeling increasingly frustrated and annoyed. Whenever I tried to discuss it with her, she dismissed my concerns. She'd say it was all in my head, or that she was just tired from working hard for us, and that our intimate life was fine. I was worried about where things were heading. At the end of her first year on the job, I was invited to join her at the staff Christmas party at the CEO's home. There, I met her boss, Dan, and his wife for the first time. We had a polite, brief conversation before they moved on to mingle. Amy guided me to others and started chatting with her coworkers. Later, it suddenly struck me as a bit odd. Amy's boss seemed like a friendly, if somewhat reserved, person, not the tough character she had described. Dan's wife was also very pleasant. Given that Amy was his executive assistant, I'd expected a more engaging conversation than just a polite exchange. I could sense Amy was a bit tense. She tended to talk quickly when nervous, which was a tell. I found it strange for her to be nervous around her boss, considering how closely they worked together. Though I trusted her completely, I filed that thought away for later reflection. Over the next year, I was extremely busy as I decided to start my own IT consultancy. On top of that, I was raising our daughters almost entirely on my own. So, I set most of my concerns about Amy aside. Life with Amy felt much like the previous year. She was traveling even more and becoming increasingly distant from all 3 of us. I'd recently noticed her attitude toward me had grown dismissive and condescending. She showed me little affection, and our intimacy was nearly non-existent. On rare occasions, she'd engage, but it felt mechanical, lacking any real closeness. It was clear our relationship was fraying. At year's end, I attended her company's Christmas party again. Our brief interaction with her boss was almost identical to the previous year. For a moment, I wondered if she was hiding something. For the first time since we'd started dating at 15, I had doubts. Could there be someone else? The thought was difficult to process. We had fought so hard together to overcome challenges and reach where we were now. She wouldn't do that, would she? What should I do? I didn't go to extremes like hiring a private investigator or checking her computer, but I started watching her more closely. I didn't find anything out of place. Either it was all in my mind, or she was exceptionally skilled at covering her tracks. Still, things weren't right between us, but I was too busy to dwell on it. Meanwhile, our girls were growing up quickly. Lauren, now 15, was blossoming into a lovely young woman, and Emma, now 12, was on the brink of adolescence. We spent a lot of time together and had a close bond, though, unfortunately, their mother had little time for them. Both girls loved playing soccer, so every Saturday morning during the season, I'd watch them play. It was a highlight of my week. After the game, we'd grab lunch, usually at their favorite Japanese restaurant, and catch up on what they were doing. I noticed they rarely mentioned their mother. Depending on the weather, we'd walk along the beach, go to a movie, or they'd meet up with their friends. After the first game of the season, Emma came over with a new teammate. She was a striking young girl, tall, beautiful, with a wide smile, long dark hair, and deep brown eyes. Clearly athletic, she had already made an impression in her debut game, scoring 2 goals. "Hey Dad, this is Callie. Can I go to her place this afternoon?" "Hi Callie, nice to meet you." "Sure, Emma, as long as Callie's parents are okay with it." Callie turned and called, "Mom, can Emma come over this afternoon?" A woman, who was clearly Callie's mom, turned and walked toward us. I was stunned. She was like a grown-up version of her daughter, absolutely gorgeous. She introduced herself as Sophie, and she agreed to Emma coming over that afternoon. We chatted a bit, though I'm not sure what I even said. I realized I was babbling a bit. After they left, my daughters burst into laughter at my obvious embarrassment. That evening, Emma told me more about Sophie. Apparently, she was a single mom. Callie's dad had passed away in a car accident 3 years ago, and she was now raising Callie and her younger brother Tom, who was 11. The single mom details certainly caught my attention. The following Saturday, as Lauren and I watched Emma's soccer game, Sophie came over with her son and asked if they could watch with us. I had prepared myself this time and was determined to act more composed. We chatted during the game, and Sophie mentioned that she'd recently moved to town for a new job and didn't know many people yet. She expressed happiness that Callie and Emma had become friends, and complimented Emma on her good manners. After the game, Emma asked if Callie could come over to our place. I replied that it would be fine with me as long as it was okay with Sophie, who agreed that it was. I then invited Callie to join us for lunch, asking if she liked sushi. Callie responded enthusiastically that she loved it. I added that it was settled, and in the spur of the moment, suggested that they all join us for lunch. Sophie thanked me but declined, saying she didn't want to intrude on our family. Feeling a bit disappointed, I then heard Lauren encourage Sophie to join us, saying it would be lovely to have her company and that she would appreciate another woman to talk to, assuring Sophie that she wouldn't be intruding. After considering, Sophie looked at me and said that she'd love to join us if I was sure it was no trouble. I nodded and managed a response, likely somewhat incoherent once again. As we turned to head toward our cars, Lauren smirked at me, gave a big wink, and smiled. Lunch turned out to be a great success. The 4 girls especially ended up talking together for nearly 2 hours. I think Tom enjoyed having another male around, and we chatted a bit about computers and football. At one point, I overheard Sophie casually ask my daughters if their mom ever came to watch their soccer games. Lauren's response caught me off guard. No, never. She doesn't show much interest in us. She's more focused on her job and herself. Dad's our mom, too. He's the one who takes care of us. Sophie glanced at me with a curious look. For the rest of the soccer season, it became a routine to have lunch together after each game. Emma and Callie grew closer, often alternating between our houses afterward and sometimes even after school. Occasionally, Tom would come over with his sister, though he preferred spending time with me. We'd tinker with computers, kick a soccer ball around, or go biking. I noticed that Lauren began visiting Sophie, and the two of them would often go shopping together, stopping for coffee and girl talk. I also observed that my daughters never mentioned Sophie to their mom, nor did I. Sophie and I were becoming good friends, too. Since I was practically a single parent like her, helping each other out made things easier. After the soccer season ended, Saturday afternoons increasingly became time when our kids would head out on their own to visit friends or go on outings. With my wife rarely around, I was mostly free, so Sophie and I often spent that time together, going for walks, having a casual lunch, or watching a movie. I found myself looking forward to these meetings and realized I was developing feelings for her, though we never crossed the line into anything beyond friendship. One day over coffee, I thanked Sophie for spending girl time with Lauren. You know, she never stops talking about you when she gets home. Sophie this and Sophie that. I laughed. Sophie laughed too, saying, well, Tom's the same after visiting you. Alan this and Alan that. Honestly, he needs a male role model in his life, so I really appreciate you spending time with him. Then, she suddenly added, forgive me for being direct, Alan, but it's pretty clear things aren't all that great between you and your wife. We had always avoided discussing Amy, so her comment caught me off guard. I sat there in silence for about 30 seconds, realizing it was an issue I had avoided for a long time. The truth is, Sophie, if it weren't for the girls, I probably would have left long ago. Things have been bad for several years. I've tried to talk to her repeatedly, but I just hit a brick wall. Our marriage was tough from the start. I'm sure Lauren told you how Amy and I ended up getting married. Yes, and she actually feels a bit responsible for your situation. It's ridiculous, of course, and I've been telling her it's absolutely not her fault. That broke down my own barriers, and I spent the next hour unloading all my troubles on Sophie. When I finished, she came over and held me tightly in her arms. It was the first real hug from a woman I'd had in ages. I'm here for you whenever you need me, Alan. You know that. I hugged her tighter, not wanting to let go. Not long after, as another year was wrapping up, Amy's annual staff Christmas party arrived once more. My reintroduction to her boss went much like the past 2 years, but this time I was on high alert. Though Amy and her boss seemed more relaxed around each other, something felt off. I was definitely growing suspicious. Later in the evening, Amy excused herself to use the restroom. A minute later, I noticed her boss casually making his way upstairs as well. I decided to follow and looked around for her. She wasn't in the restroom, so I searched through the large house. Just as I was about to pass a slightly ajar bedroom door, I heard her voice inside say, "Merry Christmas, my darling." A man's voice replied, "Merry Christmas, my love." Peeking through the crack, I saw Amy and her boss locked in a long, passionate kiss, their hands all over each other. In shock, I quickly stepped back. I returned downstairs, reeling, and contemplated my next move. Beyond anger, I felt empty. I'm not one to confront immediately, so I calmed myself down, deciding instead to investigate and plan. A bit later, Amy returned, looking a little flushed, and spent the rest of the night pretending to be my devoted wife. I played along as if nothing had happened. By New Year's, while Amy was asleep, I'd managed to access her phone and laptop. Amy should have known better. Leaving incriminating evidence on her personal computer, even if well hidden, isn't wise when her husband's profession involves computer security. My worst fears were confirmed. In her work, personal, and secret email accounts, I found a damning trail of evidence. Amy had been in a long-term, intense affair with her boss that had begun over 2 years ago. There were graphic photos and videos of them together, underscoring the depth of her betrayal. Their emails even hinted at discussions about leaving their respective partners to be together. While Amy seemed interested, her lover appeared more hesitant. I realized I'd been a naive, oblivious husband. I installed hidden surveillance software on both her phone and laptop, allowing me to monitor her every electronic and physical move remotely, if needed. My marriage was clearly over, and my priority now was keeping custody of my daughters and securing my business and finances. After the new year, I consulted a divorce lawyer who explained that divorces are no fault, meaning I couldn't file based on adultery. However, regarding custody, she explained that once children turn 14, they can choose which parent they want to live with. She also helped develop a strategy to protect my company in the divorce settlement. With Emma turning 14 in 6 months, I decided I could bear living with Amy until then, giving me time to prepare. I would have to keep everything secret from her to make it work. I told Sophie what I'd uncovered, and she broke down in tears. I was surprised. I'd thought I'd be the one needing comfort. I held her, and she tearfully revealed that her late husband had died in a car accident with his secretary, with whom she later found out he'd been having an affair, making the loss even more painful. Once she calmed down, we discussed my plan to leave Amy, and Sophie just smiled knowingly. To begin, I persuaded Amy that since we were both earning well, we should sell our small house and rent a larger one while searching for our dream home, using the equity as a down payment. She agreed easily, and our house sold quickly. We rented a nearby place, with the lease in my name only for a 6-month term. Sharing a bed with Amy was unbearable, and when we moved, I used a bad cold as an excuse to sleep in the spare room to avoid spreading it. I simply never moved back, and she didn't mention it. Maybe she didn't notice, or maybe she preferred it that way. Next, I confided in my dad and had him set up a new IT company with him as the official owner and myself as the sole employee. I then closed my company and began operating through his. Everything was going according to plan until one day, Lauren approached me looking nervous and frightened. My immediate thought, with a pang of déjà vu, was that she might be pregnant, just like her mom had been. "Dad, this is really hard to tell you, but Mom is having an affair with her boss." I was shocked that she knew, and found myself at a loss for words. "Really? Why do you think that?" "Well, shortly after we moved in here, Emma and I went back to the old house to pick up something she'd forgotten. Mom and her boss were there." "That's unusual, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything." "They were being intimate on the floor in the living room." Once I got over the initial shock, I replied, "I know about the affair, Lauren. I've known for a while. Then why don't you do something about it?" "Did Emma see them too?" "Yes." I called Emma, who had been listening nearby, and she came into the room, looking embarrassed. I hugged them both, understanding how difficult it must have been for them to witness, especially for Emma. "Can you both keep a very big secret?" They nodded. "I'm planning to leave your mother soon. I'm just waiting until Emma turns 14, so you can both legally decide where you want to live." "With you!" they both shouted together. "It won't be easy keeping this secret, but we can't let your mother suspect anything until then." They shared a conspiratorial smile. Afterward, I asked Sophie to have a heart-to-heart with Lauren. Now that Lauren had her first boyfriend, I didn't want her to follow in her mother's footsteps. Fortunately, Amy wasn't around often, so we could handle her occasional presence and keep our plans secret. We enjoyed ourselves even more when she was away, knowing that the end was near. We were spending more and more time with Sophie and her kids, often sharing meals at each other's homes or going out together. One Friday afternoon, while my wife was supposedly at a conference for the weekend, but was actually with her boss at a hotel, Lauren announced, "Dad, I'm babysitting for Sophie tonight." "Oh, really? What's she doing?" "She's going on a dinner date with a guy at Brasserie Paris, that fancy French place downtown." I immediately felt a wave of jealousy and tried unsuccessfully to hide it. Lauren looked at me with a mix of pity and amusement. "She's going out with you, Dad. It's time you both had a real date. I made the reservation already, so go on. Just call her and ask her properly," she said, handing me my phone. "What if she doesn't want to go on a date with me? We're just friends after all. I don't want to make her feel uncomfortable." "How you managed to get through college is beyond me. Just call her." So I did, and Sophie sounded absolutely thrilled and accepted right away. Somehow I got the feeling this wasn't a surprise to her. That evening, it took me 3 attempts before my daughters were satisfied that I was dressed well enough for dinner. As I was about to leave, Callie and Tom arrived. Seeing my questioning look, Lauren said, "Oh, I forgot to mention, they're staying over tonight, so don't worry about coming home late, or even at all if you'd prefer." She smiled and handed me an already packed overnight bag. Clearly, our children had worked together on this plan. When I arrived, Sophie greeted me at the door. Oh my God. She was wearing a fitted black cocktail dress with a plunging neckline and high heels. The dress hugged every curve of her athletic figure. Her 34C chest, free of any bra, created an alluring effect, with 2 enticing points visible. Her long black hair was swept to one side in a loose braid. "Well, say something, Alan. I'm speechless." "You like?" she asked, doing a little twirl. "Oh, much more than like, Sophie." We had a fantastic dinner, enjoying each other's company the entire time. When we got to her front door at the end of the evening, I said, "I know our kids arranged for me to stay the night, but you don't have to feel..." She placed a finger over my lips and whispered, "I'm counting on you staying," then led me inside and up to her bedroom. I had no intention of arguing with that. We started out a bit shy and tentative. It was the first time for both of us with someone new. If I'd thought she looked stunning before, seeing her without clothes was absolutely breathtaking. It didn't take long for us to feel at ease and fully embrace the moment. I let go of all my pent-up frustration, both mental and physical, and felt as if I'd reached pure bliss. By the end, I was completely spent. The next morning, we made sweet love again, and afterward, we stayed in bed, savoring the afterglow and the warmth of our bodies intertwined. It had been a long time for both of us, and everything felt so right. Soon we heard footsteps on the stairs, voices, and a knock at the door, which then opened. Lauren poked her head in. "Good morning, you two. It's almost 10, and we got tired of waiting, so we came over. Breakfast will be ready downstairs in 20 minutes. Oh, and I was going to ask if you had a good evening, but judging by your faces, there's no need." She grinned. We heard laughter as they all walked away. "How did we end up with such a great bunch of kids, Sophie?" The breakfast they prepared was delicious, and it was wonderful to share it together, almost like a family. Later at home, I attempted to explain to my daughters what had happened with Sophie, reminding them that technically I was still married. They responded by rolling their eyes and laughing at my awkwardness, telling me it was time for me to be happy again, and insisting that, in reality, I wasn't truly married to their mom anymore, since she had emotionally left a long time ago. When I asked them what they were all plotting with this grand conspiracy, they revealed that they'd all agreed Emma and I needed a mother, while Callie and Tom needed a father, concluding that Sophie and I belonged together, making it a win for everyone involved. Still hesitant, I pointed out that even if I thought it was a good idea, Sophie might not feel the same way. They laughed, urging me to realize how obvious her feelings were, and that I should be able to tell what she wanted. When I asked if I had any say in this, they replied, clearly amused, that I had absolutely no choice in the matter. They found my discomfort thoroughly entertaining, and it was clear I was now being firmly guided by my daughters. A few days later, over dinner with everyone present, I mentioned my plans to start house hunting the following weekend. Sophie, curious, asked what kind of place I was looking for. I explained that I wanted something near the beach, 2 stories with a large family room, a kids' escape room, a big backyard, and a pool. I added that it needed at least 6 bedrooms in case my family grew in the future, and, looking directly at her, mentioned that I also wanted to be sure that a woman I might be falling head over heels for would like it too. Sophie held my gaze for a long moment, then walked over and kissed me passionately in front of the kids. When we finally broke apart, the kids watched in silence for a moment before bursting into cheers and dancing around us. I took that as a yes. After a few weeks of searching, we found the perfect home. We decided to buy it together, using her husband's life insurance money and the proceeds from my house sale as a deposit. The stage was set for the showdown with Amy. As Emma's 14th birthday, and therefore D-Day, approached, Amy announced she'd be attending a week-long sales conference on the West Coast. Checking her emails later, I discovered that she was actually headed on vacation with her boss to celebrate their 3rd anniversary on the island of Bali in Indonesia. To keep this under wraps, they each told colleagues they were going on family vacations to make up for the time they'd been dedicating to work. Amy would leave a day before her boss and travel solo, with him following the next day. She planned to return a day earlier than he would to maintain the story's credibility. They were getting sloppy. This plan was far from foolproof and could easily fall apart if anyone took the time to look into it. Once Amy flew out for her conference, we began packing and moved into our new house right away, where Sophie and her kids had settled a month earlier. If there's a Balinese god of revenge, it must have been smiling on me. The very evening Amy arrived, Bali's active volcano, Mount Agung, erupted, filling the air with clouds of volcanic ash. All flights in and out of Bali were immediately canceled. Her lover was still home while Amy was stuck in Bali alone for their anniversary. I laughed so hard I nearly lost my breath. It was almost too perfect to believe. The volcanic activity continued, and flights remained grounded, keeping the pair apart. Behind the scenes, I checked Amy's emails and messages daily for amusement. The two of them were not pleased with the situation, and Amy was growing increasingly frustrated with Dan, as if it were his fault. Occasionally, Amy would call home, telling us how busy she was with the conference, and I'd ask her about the hotel and the city she claimed to be in. Later, when I accessed her laptop remotely, I saw she'd been frantically searching online for information to give me believable answers. Meanwhile, all 6 of us were settling into our new home comfortably. I had my lawyer file a legal separation document with the family court. I also obtained interim custody of my daughters by filing their signed requests to live with me. As Amy's return date drew closer, flights were still canceled, leaving me wondering how she would manage the situation. One evening, she called to say that she'd made many promising sales connections at the conference, and her boss had asked her to stay longer to follow up on them immediately before coming home. I could sense her nervousness. Fortunately for her, it wasn't a video call, as I couldn't have kept a straight face. I simply reassured her that we were fine and that I understood. After another week passed with her still stranded in Bali, I watched as frantic emails and messages flew between Amy and her boss. He'd informed everyone at work that she'd had to extend her leave due to a family emergency. Her boss even called me, apologizing profusely for keeping Amy away for so long, but insisted it was a critical opportunity for the company. I'd anticipated his call and was ready to respond like the understanding husband of a busy professional wife. I assured him that everything was fine and that I understood, then casually asked where Amy would be traveling next. He scrambled to name a few places. I later read the email where he relayed that information to Amy, so she'd know where she was supposed to be. My strategy was to make her uneasy, planting the seeds of doubt that she'd been found out. Each time she called, I reassured her, but I also asked specific questions about the sites in the towns she was supposedly visiting. I could tell what she'd researched in advance, so I threw in a few unexpected questions just to watch her scramble, all while playing the part of a clueless husband. During one call, I remarked, "Hey, Amy, have you been hearing about those poor people stuck in Bali who can't get home because of the volcano?" After a brief silence, she replied, "Oh yes, but I haven't paid much attention to the news. One of my colleagues has been stuck there for 2 weeks. You remember Paul Howard and his wife? We met them about 6 months ago." "Oh, yes. We're working on a project and he's been doing his part remotely from his hotel in Nusa Dua. At least the Grand Hyatt isn't a bad place to be stuck." I heard a sharp intake of breath from Amy. She was, of course, staying at the Grand Hyatt, although Paul wasn't even in Bali, but she didn't know that. Immediately after the call, she moved to a cheap hotel on the other side of the island, likely hoping she could still cover her tracks. My 5 girls, and yes, Sophie's children were mine now, found the whole situation hilarious. Finally, nearly 3 weeks later, the volcanic eruption stopped, and flights resumed from Bali. Amy called to let me know her work was wrapping up, and that she'd be home Friday afternoon. I waited for her return at our rented, now otherwise empty house. I'd planned this meeting very carefully. When she arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. She entered looking tired and visibly nervous, with a deep suntan that was a little out of place for someone supposedly on a business trip. I skipped the usual, obligatory kiss on the cheek. "Wow, you've got quite a tan from your business trip. Did you manage to get any work done?" She stammered something, her face turning red. "Sit down and have a glass of wine with me." I poured wine into my glass and took a sip. Alan, I'm exhausted. I just want to go upstairs, take a shower, and rest before dinner. I'm sorry, but there's something we need to discuss right now, so please sit down. I added that the girls were staying overnight with a friend so we wouldn't be disturbed. Amy's face showed real fear, clearly thinking her time was up, but she didn't yet know how. Reluctantly, she sat down, and I poured her a glass. I had rehearsed this speech many times, making sure to wear a remorseful expression. You know things between us haven't been good for a while, Amy. Do you know why that might be? She looked terrified and managed only a faint no. I'm sorry, Amy, there's no easy way to say this. The truth is, I've met someone else. I love her and want to be with her, so I've decided to leave you. In an instant, shock replaced her fearful look, and fury took over as she sat there, speechless. I continued, keeping my apologetic tone. I never intended for it to happen. You were away so much. I guess I just felt lonely. How dare you do this to me, Alan, after all I've done for you? She spat out, her voice dripping with anger, going on with accusations. I sat quietly, maintaining a sorrowful look as she ranted for a solid 5 minutes. I can see you're very upset, and I understand. There's no point in discussing this further now. I'll come back tomorrow afternoon around 4 so we can talk more. There's a lot we need to work out. I left, ignoring her angry texts and voicemails that followed. When I arrived home, everyone was eager to know how it had gone. Even better than expected, I replied. We had pizza for dinner and watched a movie together. The girls turned off their phones to avoid their mother, though I reminded them they couldn't cut contact with her altogether. Why hadn't I confronted her about the affair? Because leaving her this way would be far more painful. That night, Sophie and I shared tender love, and every worry and bit of tension seemed to melt away. Amy who? The next afternoon, I arrived at the old house with a folder of paperwork. I was greeted by a still very angry Amy, accompanied by her best friend Claire, a lawyer I had never liked. I had seen old emails where Claire had encouraged Amy to continue the affair when Amy was feeling guilty and considering ending it. I sat down at the table across from them, ready to proceed. Claire took the lead, clearly opting for an aggressive approach. She launched into a lengthy tirade, calling me a terrible husband and praising Amy as a wonderful wife and mother. She accused me of taking advantage of Amy while she was away working hard for the family, insisting I should be begging for Amy's forgiveness. Claire warned that if I didn't reconcile, Amy would clean me out in the divorce, take custody of the girls, and I'd never see them again. Hypocritical as it was, they seemed to assume that if I'd known about Amy's affair with her boss, I would have already confronted it last night. I kept a sorrowful, apologetic, and slightly puzzled expression. Amy, I know this must be painful for you, but I admit I'm a little surprised at how angry you are. For quite a while, I haven't felt that you loved me anymore. You've been distant, both physically and emotionally, from our marriage for the last 3 years. That's complete nonsense, Alan. Of course, I've been here. Yes, I work a lot, which takes me away sometimes, but I do it for us. Well then, Amy, tell me, when was the last time we made love? Amy stayed silent. I can tell you it was 3 years ago. That's not true at all. We do have sex. Yes, very occasionally, but I was talking about making love. I even remember the exact time. 3 years ago, you were on a business trip and forgot to call Emma on her 11th birthday. She tried to reach you repeatedly that evening, but couldn't get hold of you. She was heartbroken. I remember it well because Emma's birthday was just 2 weeks ago, and while you were away again, you forgot to call her. It felt like the anniversary of something painful. She gave me a guilty look. After you returned from that trip 3 years ago, things between us were never the same. I've often wondered why. I could see from their expressions that I'd struck a chord. They both looked uncomfortable and exchanged uneasy glances. After all, Amy, we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for about 6 months now. That hasn't seemed to bother you. I can't even remember the last time we went out together or took a vacation. It almost feels like you're taking your vacations at work. They both flinched. When you're home, you're not really here. Not with me and not with the girls either. I smiled inwardly as I saw them squirm. In any case, Amy, I'm sorry, but I'm moving forward. I hope we can make this separation as smooth as possible for the girls' sake. There's no chance for reconciliation. Who is she? Do I know her? You've met her daughter, Callie, Emma's best friend. Her mom, Sophie, and I met last year at Saturday soccer and became friends. Over time, our friendship grew into love. We've been in a relationship and recently decided to move in together. Before they could respond, I placed a large, organized folder on the table. I've prepared some documents for you. Tab A is a legal separation agreement I filed in court 2 weeks ago. Tab B is a divorce application for you to sign. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can move forward. Tab C outlines a proposed financial settlement. Tab D includes a new rental agreement for this house. The lease expires in 3 weeks, so if you wish to stay, you'll need to renew it in your name. Tab E includes all the utility contracts, with termination notices set for 3 weeks. You'll need to transfer these to your name if you want to stay. In Tab F, you'll find bank statements. I've taken 60% of the funds in our joint accounts. Credit cards in your name are now solely your responsibility. Lastly, Tab G is an interim custody and child support order. The girls have opted to live with me, so I have custody. Child support will be automatically deducted from your paycheck. Visitation access is flexible, so we can work out an arrangement. They were visibly stunned by how thoroughly prepared I was. Claire, unable to contain herself, sneered, "You've been plotting this for ages, haven't you? We're not going to let you get away with it. We'll take your company, the girls, and every cent you have." "Yes, I have been preparing since Christmas," I replied calmly. "At your staff Christmas party, Amy, I realized things were truly over, and it was time to act." I could see Amy struggling to remember what had happened that night. "So, selling the house to buy another was a sham then?" Claire said accusingly. I simply smiled. "As for taking everything, Claire, there's nothing to take. I closed my company months ago. I'm now employed by someone else. I bought a new house with Sophie after filing for separation, so it's not a marital asset. Since I have legal custody of the girls, I used 60% of the house sale funds to purchase our new home. So, honestly, I don't see what you can do here, Claire. And as for custody, state law allows children over 14 to choose where they want to live, and they chose me. You're really a lowlife, Alan. I bet you poisoned the girls against Amy." "I wouldn't do that. I'm not that kind of person. Even if I wanted to influence them, I didn't need to. Amy has done that herself by neglecting them these past 3 years. Amy, if you want to rebuild a strong relationship with them, you'll need to work at it. Their well-being depends on a healthy bond with their mother." Claire argued that Amy hadn't neglected the girls and insisted she was a good mother. I countered that the girls didn't see it that way, pointing out that she had been practically absent from their lives for years. I then urged Amy to consider who actually took care of their needs, who fed them, took them to sports, packed their school lunches, helped with homework, bought their clothes, remembered their birthdays and got them presents, went to movies with them, listened to their problems, helped them through their first periods, and gave them love and affection. I left the question open, and Amy fell silent, visibly struggling to process it all. I then informed her that the girls had asked if she'd meet them for brunch the next morning at 10 a.m. at the beachside cafe. I admitted it was my suggestion, as they weren't especially eager to see her. I asked if I should let them know she agreed. Amy simply nodded. I left them and returned home to my family. The girls reported back the next day that Amy spent the entire time bad-mouthing me and demanding they come live with her. In the end, they excused themselves to go to the restroom and quietly slipped out instead. I couldn't understand why she wanted to reconcile. She hadn't cared about me in years. Perhaps I'd just been a convenient babysitter and housekeeper.
It was a complete shock when Alan told me he was leaving me for someone else. How could he? I thought he loved me. Even though I tried a few times to talk about reconciliation, he wasn't interested, and our only interaction was when picking up or dropping off our daughters for visits. The girls were openly hostile, and time spent with them was uncomfortable. When I dropped them off, they'd run happily to their new stepmother and hug her, clearly intending to frustrate me. Eventually, I told them not to visit until they truly wanted to. I had always envisioned my life continuing as it was, with my lover for my enjoyment while Alan took care of me at home. The shock of Alan actually leaving was devastating. Over the following months, I realized that while his decision was surprising, it shouldn't have been. Alan was right. In many ways, I'd been absent as a wife. I'd poured nearly all my affection, emotional closeness, and intimacy into Dan over the last 3 years, leaving very little for Alan. The real surprise was that he'd stayed as long as he had. Unable to afford the rent on the house along with child support, I had to move into a small, old apartment. I spent my nights alone, watching TV and eating takeout. Dan's attitude changed too after Alan left me. Suddenly, he was often too busy with his family to spend much time with me, even though I was now single and available. More and more, he sent me on business trips alone, saying I could handle clients by myself. When we were together, the emotional connection felt gone, and we just ended up having sex. But it wasn't fulfilling anymore. About 6 months after my marriage ended, Dan announced he was taking a job in another city with a new company. Tearfully, I told him never to contact me again. I quickly became a divorced woman. I couldn't help but think of that Joni Mitchell line, Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Foolishly, I'd thought I could have it all. It didn't help that Alan was now with a beautiful woman who was so kind that I couldn't even hate her. He looked so happy with his new partner, the same way he'd looked with me when we were young parents, struggling together but deeply in love. I remembered how we used to face every hardship together and come out strong. How had I let that fall apart? My daughters seemed much happier too, treating Sophie as a mother figure rather than me. I had become just an unwelcome reminder of their past, someone they felt obligated to see occasionally. That hurt deeply. I think I hit rock bottom when I started complaining to my daughters about my situation. Lauren looked at me with a cold stare, remarking that I had essentially tossed Dad aside. I admitted to her that I hadn't been a perfect wife and may have neglected them, but pointed out that he was the one who had left me for another woman. Lauren, however, corrected me, explaining that he had left because I'd been having an affair with my boss for 3 years. The horror on my face said it all. I felt completely ashamed. Alan had known the whole time but had chosen to stay silent. My life was in shambles. I realized I had truly thrown away a wonderful husband and nearly lost my daughters. True to his word, Alan had encouraged the girls to keep in contact with me, reminding me that I had a lot of work ahead to repair our relationship. Gradually, the girls began visiting of their own accord and even stayed the night sometimes. One evening, as I dropped the girls off at their new home, I asked Alan if we could have a brief talk, and he walked with me to the car. I turned to him and told him I'd learned from Lauren that he had known about Dan and me. Apologizing, I admitted he had been a good husband who didn't deserve what I'd done. I confessed that I had acted selfishly and got what I deserved. Alan simply nodded. I then asked why he hadn't told me he knew, wondering if he could have stopped me before it was too late to save our marriage. He explained that by the time he had found out, it was already too late. Curious, I asked him when he'd first discovered it. Alan revealed that he'd caught me sneaking away with Dan at the office Christmas party the previous year, and afterward had uncovered everything. I blushed deeply, feeling a wave of shame. Alan admitted that he'd been quite amused when I ended up stranded in Bali alone. Feeling miserable, I asked if he hated me and why he hadn't confronted me. He explained that he'd been angry but wanted me to feel his pain and experience some consequences. He told me he'd discovered that I hadn't been Dan's first assistant, noting that Dan had a pattern of capture and dump. Alan had decided the best punishment was to stay quiet and let events unfold. Knowing Dan's history, Alan figured that if the affair stayed hidden, Dan would string me along for a while before losing interest and eventually leaving me. Alan had worried that if he confronted me and the affair went public, Dan's wife might divorce him, leaving Dan free to be with me and avoid any consequences. He admitted, too, that he thought it would hurt me more if I thought he'd simply left for another woman. I have to admit, Alan, your plan worked flawlessly. You definitely got your revenge. My life has completely fallen apart. He replied, I suppose, looking back, I'm a little sorry you were hurt so badly. Just a bit, to be honest. You don't need to apologize. It was my fault. If you had done what I did, I'd have walked out on you, too. Looking back, I was swept up by the excitement and got dependent to it. I tried to stop early on, but by then I was too far gone. I became so obsessed with him and so focused on my own wants that I ignored you and the girls for a while. My anger's faded now, Amy, and I do forgive you. I'm more philosophical about it, I guess. After all, I wouldn't be with Sophie now if you hadn't cheated. I know, I said, and that's what hurts the most. Our marriage was hard from the beginning, Amy, so I don't think you're a terrible person. You made a serious mistake, yes, but he was very good at manipulation. You never got the chance to grow up normally, enjoy being a teen, and figure out who you truly wanted to spend your life with. You were ripe for the picking. And he took full advantage. You're probably right, Alan. But why did you have to tell the girls about him? That was just too cruel. No wonder they resented me. I didn't tell them, Amy. They told me. What? How? They went back to our old house unexpectedly and found you two in action in the living room. It was right after we moved our things out. At first I couldn't remember, but then it hit me with horror. What did they see? Pretty much everything, even Emma. Lauren gave me quite a vivid description of it. My body seemed to collapse under the weight of it, and I began to sob uncontrollably, oblivious to my surroundings. I don't know how long I cried, but I became aware of Alan's arms around me, holding me tightly as I buried my head in his chest. That familiar comfort only made me cry harder. I vaguely sensed being lifted and carried inside, then laid gently on the couch. I felt so awful. Everyone, including Alan's new partner Sophie, was being incredibly kind. She insisted I stay and calm down, then, once I'd recovered, insisted I join them for dinner. Sitting around the table with his new family, I saw how happy Alan looked. I realized just how badly I'd messed up. Later, as I walked out to my car, Alan put his hands on my shoulders. "Amy, I don't want you to keep punishing yourself like this. We both had a rough start in life, becoming parents and committing so young. When you think about it, it's actually amazing our marriage lasted 14 years. That's something we can both be proud of. And look at the positives. Our 2 mistakes gave us 2 amazing daughters who have grown into wonderful young women. That's a fantastic legacy from our marriage that no one can ever take away." "You're right about that, Alan. Speaking of mistakes, I should tell you I've made another one. Sophie is pregnant, so we're moving up the wedding. You certainly are mistake-prone. You're a good man and a great husband, Alan, better than I deserved. I do wish you all the best." I gave him a hug and kissed him on the cheek before leaving. My place in his life had truly been filled. All I could hope for now was to find someone as good as him, but that felt like a long shot.
Why had I forgiven Amy so easily? For a few reasons. Hatred can consume you, leaving bitterness behind. She was also constantly reminded of her choices just by seeing me happy with Sophie. And though things had fallen apart, there was still a bond between us from the love we once shared. While I'd wanted to see Amy face consequences, my true revenge was aimed at her boss, Dan, the one who'd lured her away from me in the first place. I had managed to hack into Dan's computer by sending an email disguised to look like it came from Amy, embedded with a Trojan that gave me full access. I discovered he had been quietly and cleverly embezzling money from his old employer and was pulling the same scheme at his current job. I gathered all the evidence and sent it anonymously to both companies and to the police. With the undeniable evidence stacked against him, Dan pleaded guilty at his trial and received a 7-year prison sentence. His wife stood by him through the court process and visited him in prison with their children. Later, I met with her and showed her additional evidence of his numerous affairs. Furious, she decided on the spot to leave him. To complete my revenge, I visited Dan in prison. At first, he didn't recognize me. "Hi, Dan, we've actually met before. I'm Amy's ex-husband." "What the hell do you want, jerk?" "I'm here with some messages. First, from my former wife, Amy. She sends her regards and hopes you're enjoying the new home I personally helped arrange for you." "What?" "You know, you really should have hired someone to encrypt your computer. After hacking it, it took me only 15 minutes to find everything. I just couldn't resist passing it all along to the police." Once his anger simmered down, I continued. "By the way, I also paid a visit to your wife and shared the photos and videos I found of you and your girlfriends. She was extremely angry. She insisted we have a little revenge fling in your bed, and I couldn't say no. I have to wonder why she wasn't enough for you. She was quite wild." "That's a lie. She wanted me to share these with you." I laid out photos of us together in various intimate positions, though they had been cleverly faked with Photoshop, something he wouldn't know. She also had a message. "She'll never visit you here again, and you won't be seeing your children anymore." I referred her to my lawyer who's handling her divorce. His expression was priceless. Yes, revenge is indeed a dish best served cold.